The studio lights beamed down, the audience murmured in anticipation, and the cameras rolled as the Lisa Caldwell Show went live. Lisa Caldwell, a seasoned TV host known for her sharp tongue and controversial interviews, adjusted her earpiece and smiled into the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest today," she announced, her voice dripping with that carefully curated charm that had made her famous. She's been in the public eye for years, admired by some, criticized by others. Please welcome Melania Trump. The audience erupted into a mix of applause and hesitant murmurs. Even after leaving the White House, Melania remained a subject of endless debate. Some admired her grace and quiet strength. Others dismissed her as nothing more than a former First Lady with little to say. As Melania walked onto the stage, she did so with the same poised elegance she was known for. Dressed in an ivory pantsuit, her chin slightly lifted, she gave a small smile and nodded politely to the audience before taking a seat across from Lisa. Lisa leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with the kind of excitement that came from knowing she had a moment of controversy brewing. "Melania, thank you for being here. Thank you for having me," Melania replied, her voice steady, her accent still unmistakable. Lisa flipped through her cue cards dramatically before settling on one. "So, let's address the elephant in the room," she said, smirking. "People have often said you were the most silent First Lady in modern history. Critics argue that you did little, stayed in the shadows, and let your husband define your legacy. Do you think that's fair?" The audience chuckled awkwardly, sensing the tension beneath Lisa's words. The moment was designed to be a trap, an invitation for Melania to stumble, to get defensive, to fumble her way through a justification. But Melania didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, a glimmer of something unreadable in her eyes. "I think," she said calmly, "that people sometimes mistake dignity for silence. Just because I did not scream does not mean I did not speak." The crowd murmured in surprise. Lisa's smile faltered just slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Interesting. But let's be honest here, Melania. Do you really think anyone remembers any major initiative you worked on?" Melania folded her hands in her lap, her expression unchanged. "Be Best was my initiative," she said, referring to her campaign against cyberbullying and opioid abuse. "It helped children in many schools, in many states, but I did not do it for headlines. I did it for them." Lisa blinked, caught off guard by the quiet but firm response. The audience was now listening, leaning in, sensing that something different was happening here. Melania Trump wasn't here to be embarrassed. She was here to remind America who she really was. Lisa Caldwell shifted in her chair, realizing that the interview was not going as planned. She had expected Melania to stumble, to fumble through rehearsed lines, or better yet, to get defensive. Instead, the former First Lady remained calm, composed, and completely unshaken. "Well," Lisa said, forcing a smile, "I suppose some people appreciated your Be Best initiative, but let's talk about the criticism. Many believe it was hypocritical, considering your husband's, let's say, bold presence on social media. How did you justify advocating against cyberbullying while being married to one of the most controversial figures on Twitter?" A few people in the audience chuckled, but there were also murmurs of discomfort. It was an obvious jab, an attempt to corner Melania into either defending or criticizing her own husband. A lesser person might have flinched. Melania didn't. Instead, she took a slow breath, her expression as smooth as glass. "You assume that a wife must control her husband's words. I do not believe that. I believe in teaching children to be kind despite what the world says. I believe in strength that is not measured in tweets but in actions." The audience quieted. Lisa's smile was slipping. "Well, that's a convenient answer," Lisa said, flipping to another card. "But let's talk about your time in the White House. Many First Ladies took center stage, championing causes, making speeches, being vocal, yet you seemed absent. Many people felt you were just there, a quiet figure, standing in the background. Do you regret not being more, I don't know, present?" Melania's eyes met Lisa's, unblinking. "Do you measure a woman's presence by how loudly she speaks?" she asked. Lisa faltered. "Well, I was there," Melania continued, her voice smooth but firm. "I visited hospitals. I spoke with children. I traveled to meet soldiers overseas. I worked, even when the cameras were not there. Perhaps, if I had shouted more, you would remember." A murmur ran through the audience. Lisa sat up straighter, caught off guard by how quickly the conversation was slipping from her grasp. Melania didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply sat there, poised and elegant, as if she'd expected every attempt to undermine her and had already decided they wouldn't touch her. Lisa tried one last angle. "You know, Melania, people have often speculated that you didn't want to be First Lady, that you were unhappy, even trapped. Some have even said that you only stayed in the marriage for—" Melania held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "My marriage is not for you to analyze," she said, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. "You may ask about my work, you may ask about my choices, but I do not need to prove my happiness to you." The audience gasped softly. Lisa opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in her career, she had no clever comeback, because Melania Trump had just taken complete control of the interview. The tension in the studio was thick, the air charged with an energy no one had expected. Lisa Caldwell, a woman who had built her career on tearing down public figures with clever jabs and well-timed sarcasm, was suddenly off balance. Melania Trump, the woman she had assumed would be an easy target, had just flipped the entire conversation. Lisa cleared her throat, desperately trying to regain control. "Well," she said, forcing another smile, "that was quite the response. But let's move on." She shuffled her cue cards, searching for something, anything, that could put her back in control. She found it. Many former First Ladies have left behind powerful legacies. Michelle Obama, for instance, focused on education and health. Hillary Clinton transitioned into politics. Laura Bush was a major advocate for literacy. What do you think your legacy will be? And more importantly, do you think history will remember you at all? It was a cruel question, disguised as a neutral one, a veiled suggestion that Melania had contributed nothing, that she would be forgotten. Melania tilted her head slightly, considering her words before answering, and then she smiled. Not a forced political smile, but a small, knowing one. "I think history is written by those who take the time to look deeper," she said. Lisa frowned slightly. Meaning, if people only look at headlines, they will not see my work," Melania said smoothly. "But if they look at the letters I received from children, if they look at the hospitals I visited, if they look at the schools that still teach kindness because of Be Best, then they will see my legacy." Lisa's fingers curled around her cue cards. She hadn't expected this level of composure, this unshakable confidence. She was used to guests getting flustered, to them stumbling through defensive answers. But Melania wasn't playing defense. She was playing chess. Lisa decided to try one last dig. "But Melania, don't you think some of those efforts were overshadowed by, well, other aspects of the Trump administration? Many people feel your work was drowned out by controversy. Do you ever feel like your voice was lost in all of it?" Melania's smile didn't waver. "I think," she said, "that a strong woman does not need to shout to be heard." The room fell silent. For the first time, Lisa Caldwell had no snarky comeback, no clever twist, because Melania Trump had just turned a planned humiliation into a moment of absolute power. The audience wasn't laughing at her. They were listening to her. And for the first time in a long time, Melania knew America was finally seeing her for who she really was. The silence in the studio was deafening. Lisa Caldwell, usually the master of control, the queen of turning interviews into viral takedowns, was suddenly on shaky ground. She had tried to box Melania Trump into a corner, to paint her as irrelevant, forgotten. But Melania had done something unexpected. She had refused to play the game. Lisa shifted in her chair, trying to regain the energy she had started with. The audience was no longer smirking, no longer waiting for Melania to fumble. Instead, they were watching her with something else, something closer to respect. Lisa glanced at her notes and forced a tight-lipped smile. Well, Melania, since we're talking about public perception, let's address another common criticism. She paused for dramatic effect. Many people believe you were distant as a first lady. The infamous hand-swatting clips, the interviews where you seemed disengaged. People saw those and thought, she doesn't want to be here. Were they wrong? The audience let out a collective murmur. The question was sharp, designed to provoke. If Melania snapped, if she stumbled, if she showed even a crack in her composure, it would validate everything Lisa was implying. But Melania didn't react the way Lisa had hoped. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable, and waited a beat before answering. "I think people see what they want to see," she said calmly. Lisa arched an eyebrow. "So, you're saying those moments were misunderstood?" Melania nodded. "A woman is not defined by one moment caught on camera. A marriage is not defined by 1 second of a bad day. But I understand that people love to take one clip, one expression, and decide they know everything." Lisa pressed on. "So you're saying you were happy in the White House?" Melania's lips curved into a small smile. "I am saying I was strong in the White House." Lisa blinked. "That's not exactly an answer." Melania tilted her head slightly. "Happiness is a private thing. Strength is what the world sees." The audience murmured again, but this time it wasn't out of amusement. It was out of curiosity. Lisa had been hoping to unravel Melania, to get her to admit something, to slip up. But instead she was peeling back layers of a woman who had long been misunderstood. Lisa sighed, setting her cue cards down. "All right, Melania, let's be real here. Do you ever wish you had taken a different path, that you had stayed out of the spotlight?" For the first time in the entire interview, Melania paused a little longer. Then she smiled softly. "No." Lisa frowned slightly. "No?" Melania shook her head. "Because everything I have done, everything I have been through, it has made me who I am, and I am proud of that." The audience erupted into applause. Lisa Caldwell had spent her entire career making people question themselves. But today, Melania Trump had made America question how they had judged her. Lisa Caldwell sat frozen for just a second, caught between frustration and fascination. She had walked into this interview expecting Melania Trump to be fragile, defensive, or at the very least, flustered. Instead, Melania had remained unwavering, her quiet strength speaking louder than any defensive outburst ever could. Lisa glanced at the clock. They had one segment left, and she needed to regain control of the narrative. She leaned forward, lacing her fingers together. "All right, Melania, let's talk about your life after the White House. Some former First Ladies have stayed heavily involved in politics. Others have dedicated their time to activism. But you've remained relatively private. Some might say absent. Why is that?" A few chuckles rippled through the audience. It was a familiar narrative. Melania as the reluctant First Lady, the woman who faded from the public eye the moment she left Washington. But Melania didn't blink. "Because I do not seek attention for myself," she said simply. Lisa smirked. "Well, that's ironic, considering you married one of the most famous men in the world." Melania met her gaze evenly. "I did not marry fame, I married a man." The audience oohed. Lisa shifted slightly but kept her cool. "Okay, but surely you understand why people are curious. You had an international platform. You could be out there right now, building a brand, making speeches, writing books. Why stay so silent?" Melania's expression softened, but her confidence remained intact. "Because I do not believe words are always needed. I believe in action, and I've continued to work, just not for cameras." Lisa narrowed her eyes. "So you don't care about public opinion?" Melania's lips curved ever so slightly. "Do you?" The audience gasped, followed by a mix of laughter and applause. Lisa exhaled sharply, realizing she was once again losing ground. Melania wasn't defensive, but she wasn't backing down either. Every attempt to paint her as passive or insignificant had only revealed a woman who was perfectly comfortable with who she was, whether the world approved of her or not. Lisa decided to try one last approach. Okay, Melania, let's say you do care about action. What's next for you? What's your legacy going to be? Beyond the White House, beyond the headlines? Melania took a breath, as if choosing her words carefully. Then she looked directly into the camera. My legacy, she said, is not about proving myself to critics. It is not about making speeches for applause. It is in the schools that continue to teach kindness because of Be Best. It is in the letters I receive from children who feel seen. It is in the quiet moments of good that do not need a spotlight to be real. The studio went silent. Even Lisa, for all her quick-witted retorts and calculated questions, found herself with nothing to say. Because for the first time, the world wasn't just watching Melania Trump. They were listening. The studio had never been this quiet. The usual hum of whispers, the occasional laughter, even the predictable gasps, everything had faded. Melania Trump had taken control of the interview without ever raising her voice, without defensiveness, without desperation. She had dismantled every accusation, not with denial, but with quiet, unshakable confidence. Lisa Caldwell, for the first time in her career, had no clever comeback. She cleared her throat, sitting up straighter, trying to salvage the final moments of the interview. Well, Melania, I have to say, you've certainly given us a lot to think about today. Melania smiled slightly. I hope so. Lisa hesitated, glancing at her notes one last time. Every question had been answered. Not in the way she had expected, but answered nonetheless. The angle she had been planning, the viral takedown her producers had quietly hoped for, was gone. Instead, something unexpected had happened. Respect. Lisa sighed, then leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. Okay, I'll admit it. You surprised me today. Melania tilted her head slightly. How so? Lisa chuckled softly, shaking her head. I thought you'd be cold, defensive, maybe even dismissive, but you weren't. You were direct, unapologetic. She exhaled. I didn't expect that. Melania's expression didn't change. Many people assume who I am before they take the time to know me. Lisa nodded slowly. That's fair. A pause stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Lisa finally turned back to the camera. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've learned something today. Whether you admire Melania Trump or question her choices, one thing is clear. She is not easily rattled. She turned back to Melania. Thank you for being here today. Melania nodded gracefully. Thank you for having me. The audience, which had started the interview as a mix of skeptics and quiet critics, erupted into unexpected applause. Not because they had suddenly become her supporters, but because they had seen something today they hadn't expected. A woman who refused to be defined by anyone but herself. As Melania stood up, giving a final composed nod to the audience, Lisa watched her go, exhaling deeply. She had set out to embarrass Melania Trump. Instead, she had given her a platform to prove exactly why she never needed anyone's approval in the first place. And for the first time, America wasn't just looking at the former First Lady. They were seeing her. Melania Trump walked into an interview designed to tear her down, but instead she left America speechless. With quiet strength and unwavering confidence, she proved that dignity speaks louder than headlines. What surprised you most about her response? Comment below. If you love powerful stories like this, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring more eye-opening moments straight to you. So don't just watch, be part of the conversation.